Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Transport Today. The purpose of our webinar is to share our knowledge and experience with you on a range of transport topics that are extremely pertinent in today's environment. We have a series of short presentations from some of Abley's subject matter experts. The topics covered by the presentations include opportunities for using new census data in transport planning activities, which will be presented by Dave Smith. Innovating Streets and what we've learned about tactical urbanism, presented by Jeanette Ward. District plan reviews and the evolving rules to fit in today's context, presented by Joe Draper. Speed management planning and implementation, presented by Harris Zia. And how 3D models can enrich our transport decision making, presented by Matthew Noon. Before we start with the presentations, just a little bit about Abley, and we've certainly changed a lot since I joined as employee number 4 in 2008. We now employ around 75 staff and have 2 offices in Auckland and Christchurch. And when we're not all working from home, we also have staff working in shared office space or from their homes in Hamilton, Tauranga, Napier, and very shortly Richmond in the Tasman district. Our work can be grouped into 2 broad areas: transport, shown there by the red stars, and geospatial and technology areas by the blue stars. In the transport area, we're always working with our geospatial and technology colleagues to unlock some really powerful insights from data to empower our transport clients to make well-informed decisions. Now, our webinar today will run for around 45 minutes, including questions, which we will make time to answer after each presentation and at the end. We will record the webinar and we'll email you a link to the recording so you can refer to it in the future. Please do send us any questions you have via the Q&A tool that's highlighted on the screen here. And we'll do our best to answer them within time limits. Now, please note that there is a lag between the presentation being delivered of around 10 to 15 seconds, so please ask your questions as early as you can. If you see a question in the Q&A panel that you like and you'd like it to be answered, then please like it so we can prioritise answering it if we can. Any unanswered questions during the session will be answered in writing and provided along with the webinar recording and a copy of the presentation pack following the conclusion of the webinar. Right, so now I'll hand over to our first presenter, Dave Smith.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My presentation is going to be looking at the 2018 census data, and it will be particularly of interest to transport planners. So we have started tapping into the data for various transport projects, including the update of transport models. One of the most fundamental changes to the census data that's come through in 2018 is that the geographic boundaries have been redefined. Now, the intention here was to provide an improved sense of place, and in doing so, area units have been superseded by SA2 boundaries, and there's roughly the same number. There's about 10% more of those, and mesh blocks, which is the finest level of detail, has been redefined as SA1 areas. Now, the mesh blocks, there was previously about 47,000. They've now been aggregated to about 30,000, and they've been largely redefined based on residential activity, so looking at population and dwellings, so that there's a fairly consistent number within each of those. And you'll note from the couple of pictures you'll see on this particular slide, which are from Timaru, that there's a lot of aggregation that has occurred within commercial areas and also within industrial areas. And in that particular example, the Timaru port, which was previously represented with 15 mesh blocks, is now in one SA1 area. So there are some benefits and there are some disbenefits in this approach, and that's a challenge going ahead in terms of the use of some of this data. It's also worth noting there's a lot more variables that are being collected in 2018, so it's a good, rich set of data across the spectrum. Journey to work data has been particularly helpful to transport planners, and this has been collected for a number of years now. Interestingly enough, this time around there's been a change in the question. And previously, the question has asked, what was your main means of travel to work on the Tuesday prior to filling out the census form? and that has now changed to what is your main means of travel to work typically. So it's less influenced by weather or other environmental conditions on that Tuesday from previous census data sets. This time around, ferries have been separated out as their own mode, whereas they were previously coupled with other modes. And between 2001 and 2018, perhaps disappointingly, there hasn't been much change in terms of the relative mode share for journey to work trips. It's been very constant over that 17-year period. Another useful addition this time around is that Stats New Zealand are very transparent around the quality ratings of the data which is being collected. For journey to work data in 2013, it was rated as high quality, and this time around moderate quality. So there's some really good guidance on their website that will help you to understand how best to interpret the data, understand the veracity of the data, and how you should compare it between various different years. A fantastic new addition this time around is journey to education data, and this actually fills a considerable gap in terms of knowledge for transport planners. This is similar to journey to work in that it's broken down by mode of travel, and it captures not just school travel but also tertiary education. So the location of the school and the location of the home is also available, but there are some confidentiality restrictions around this, which Stats New Zealand are currently working through. One of the things that we have been quite interested in is to be able to isolate individual schools. We can isolate the SA1 that they fall into, and we can also bracket together the different age groups which correspond with primary, secondary and tertiary, but because of confidentiality restrictions we can't isolate individual schools. So very useful data set and very helpful for transport planners. Just to round things off for this quick presentation, you can source Stats New Zealand 2018 census data from a number of different tools that are available, largely on the Stats New Zealand website. There's a census map gallery which has got some very interesting visualizations of data, and you'll see some of those on the left there of your screen. There's roughly 7 of them at the moment, and that I imagine that will be added to over time. There's also a table viewer which supersedes the 2013 table builder, so you can go in and undertake your own queries online on the Stats New Zealand website. For a comprehensive data set at the SA1 level, you can go to that link. I believe we'll be sharing this presentation later, so you will get that. They provide large spreadsheets which you can go in and undertake the analysis yourself of the data, but as well as presenting it at SA1 level, you also get it at SA2, territorial local authority, ward and regional level. So very, very handy. You can also place customised data requests with Stats New Zealand. They generally come with a small fee, but we have found that they're very good value for money, and they know their data, they know how to use it, and that's actually really powerful if you have a particular question that you want to have answered. And lastly, integrated data infrastructure is a new service. It's essentially a very large database of Stats New Zealand data combined with other government and non-government data sets. There's lots of good information at that link there, including the ability for you as a government organisation to be able to contribute your data to the Integrated Data Infrastructure Initiative. So certainly encourage following up on that. Here's my details. You're most welcome to get in touch. I'll hand back to Courtney, sorry. And are there any questions there for me, Courtney?
Yes, we do have a couple here, Dave. Just firstly, a quick one from Mike Ferrigo at CCC. What's the age limit, if any, on the travel to education question?
That's not something that I have looked at, although we have been talking to Stats New Zealand about breaking it down into, I guess, what would be typically considered to align with the various different school levels, so 5 to 12, 13 to 17 and 18 and above. But I suspect from having filled out the census form myself, adult students would also be picked up because they would be undertaking that travel to education trip.
Thanks, Dave. And one more quickly. Hello, I know there are issues with the 2018 census. How complete is it compared to 2013?
That's a really good question for Stats New Zealand. I've only delved into some of the data sets. There's really good transparency on the Stats New Zealand website in terms of how they have approached some of these shortcomings. I know there has been a lot of criticism in the media around the way in which things were approached, and obviously there were some delays. But do go into the data sets you're interested in. There are links there to the quality of the variables, and they're very transparent where they have actually combined it with other data sets to be able to fill out and address some of the deficiencies. And short of that, look, just get in touch with Stats New Zealand, and we've found they're very very open and honest in terms of the data which is available.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dave. Okay, we will hand over to Jeanette now if you want to start sharing your presentation, Jeanette.
Is that all up there, Courtney?
Yes, looking great.
Excellent. Right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today a bit about tactical urbanism, which is highly relevant right now. We're seeing a lot of things popping up all around the world because of our COVID-19 situation. I want to talk to you about some learnings that I also recently gained from being involved in organising an open play street down here in Christchurch. So that image you see behind me is from that day. So I'm going to have a little chat about that as well. So let's start off with just defining, well, what is tactical urbanism? It's that definition you see there is fairly common. So it's all about temporary, low cost and often community-led interventions that transform urban spaces in a creative way. So I think the key thing there to note is that low cost is more around it being lower cost than a permanent installation, for example. So the scale of your temporary work may mean it doesn't feel low cost, but it's all about comparison to a more permanent solution. Those two images you see there are from Christchurch after the earthquakes, and I think this was probably when tactical urbanism really came alive in Christchurch. So the council was using, those concrete planter boxes there to liven up the streetscape, and of course those amazing gap filler initiatives that people introduced to their sites, which is great. So a few more examples from around New Zealand. So the use of car parking spaces, that's a brilliant way to introduce something into the streetscape. Palmerston North have done a really great job with their parklets, and even that cycle parking example there is from Palmerston North. That intersection being painted there, that was a community involved project down here in Christchurch. And Sales Street at the top, that's probably the biggest intersection one I think we've seen, where there's actually some safety issues that are being addressed there, and that project was actually a finalist in the 3M Awards this year. I just threw in that bus stop example there. I love that. That's in Heathcote. I'm not sure who did that, but I think that's a fantastic way to just brighten up what someone's sitting at the bus stop. So just going internationally now. New York has obviously led the way internationally, and those two photos there on the left were two that I took back in 2011 when I had the opportunity to go over there. What they essentially did was just take out road space and turn it into public space. In that case there, they've taken out a slip lane. The world didn't end. They took out some capacity in the network, and I think they've done a brilliant job of showing the world how you can actually reallocate road space. Other examples where people have reduced crossing distances, so using paint, planter boxes, flexi posts, and just trialling what that would mean, and showing that it doesn't really matter if you take a little bit of road space to make that distance shorter. Milan there at the bottom is an example of a post-COVID or COVID-19 response, where they're actually saying, well, we've got a lot of people walking and cycling, we need to reallocate that space. They're going to do it as a trial, but who knows, it might lead to a permanent situation. So we were really lucky last year that NZTA introduced their Innovating Streets for People program. So what they're obviously trying to do there is, people is the key word, they're trying to encourage people to test works before they become permanent through the use of tactical urbanism. They essentially have three types of projects there. There's the pop-up, pilot, or the semi-permanent. So the pop-up photo again is another example from our open play street here in Christchurch, which the transportation group organised, and I was very fortunate to be involved in that and have learnt a lot from that process. The middle one there is a situation where you might just try something just to see what the community think using paint, astroturf and planter boxes, but really it might start looking a bit scruffy after about a year. The other example, of course, is High Street, which is amazing. It's going to, the materials they've used there will last for some years. And along the way, they're trialling, what it means for the businesses, obviously, because it's in the parking lane. So, and then even more exciting, NZTA released their pilot fund recently, which is some funding which will give councils around a 90% assistance rate for their projects. What they're trying to encourage is not just placemaking, but also, active and safe streets. So looking at what kind of safety issues can you address through this fund. And the way I describe this to people when explaining what tactical urbanism might mean for them is say to them, have a think about your neighbourhood. What is somewhere where you think some tactical urbanism could make a difference? That example is my neighbourhood shops, and there's a zebra crossing there where one of my sons had a very scary near-miss experience, and I've heard of others having the same there. It's a wide crossing. Drivers often just don't even notice a zebra crossing. So, why don't we actually get in there and do some build-outs, put in some planter boxes? There's a great gelato shop there which gets massive queues. Why don't we theme the area? And that's how I've kind of described to people how to think about how you might do tactical urbanism. So just to wrap up, I've got three key learnings for you. So pop-ups are a really effective way to engage with the community. At our open play street here in Christchurch, we had people coming up to us, when's the next one? Oh, is this a regular thing? I haven't seen this before. When's the next one? It was just great. And I dragged along some of the Abley team to help out that day. And I think just having people hear firsthand from the community how much they really enjoyed it gives you that inspiration to try it again. And then finally, a couple of things here. So don't be afraid to add something different to what might seem like a business as usual scheme. So this concept was for a community group who wanted to improve how parking and coach movements, etc. are handled. So we came up with a number of concepts and threw in things like 3D road humps and what have you. So we might not have thought of that a few years ago, but it's front of mind now. We need to try different things. Finally, don't just engage with your landowners and business associations. What we found on Colombo Street was that a lot of people who are actually running the shops came out and said, what is this? Can we get involved? For some reason they hadn't seen the flyer or whatever. So it's really a matter of door knocking every single organisation where you're going to be doing these things to get them on board. We're writing up a full case study for that particular event, which Catherine King is going to add to the Innovating Streets website. So that will also have a whole range of lessons learned from that event. So look out for that in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much, and I hope that you're feeling a little bit more inspired.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. We have got a question for you. I'll just mute you for a second while I ask it. So is the NZTA Innovating Street pop-up pilot semi-permanent, like a linear progression between those stages, or are they standalone projects? You might need to unmute to answer that.
The answer is both. So for some types of projects, you could take it through those three stages. So if we used Colombo Street as an example, we closed it to traffic, did other things in that space. if that was then taken to the next stage, you could actually do some kind of temporary closure for a longer period of time to see how it works in terms of effects on businesses, what the people think. And then finally, it might be that you close it and pedestrianise it. So there are instances where you can go through those stages, and there might be instances where you skip the pop-up stage. I think High Street might have been an example where they might have gone straight to the semi-permanent. So yeah, it's the answer to that question is it could be a progression or it could be a standalone. It totally depends.
Great, and just one more. How do we influence those within our organisation who may not see the benefits of tactical urbanism or see it as an unnecessary add-on?
Yeah, that is a challenge, and I think you've just got to try and turn it around to what you might understand their point of view is, and kind of it becomes a bit of a marketing exercise. So you translate what you're trying to achieve into how they might think. So if their focus is safety, then going through how you can actually get some safety gains from that project might be a way of doing it. If they're focused on more of the cost related things, you can say, well, actually this is lower cost than if we put it in now and have to rip it up later. So I think you just have to get into their mindset and then translate it into their terms as a marketing exercise, essentially.
Great, and actually we'll just take one more from the floor. There's a couple we can't respond to in the time frame, but who do we have to get permission from before we start, or do we just get cracking?
Well, if that's a question from a council person, I think it's understanding how your organisation works. So for example, this event, we had to talk to the Christchurch City Council events team and also the Christchurch City Council traffic management crew in terms of the road closure. So we had two different parts of council that we needed to get permissions from. And eventually that went to a road closure subcommittee where we had to show that we'd engaged with the businesses on the street in terms of how it might impact them. So it'll depend on how your organisation runs. If you are looking at getting the funding from NZTA, then of course that is the very first place to have that conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, Jo, we will go to you and start sharing your presentation.
Hi, hopefully everyone can see this and I will get cracking. So thanks everyone for attending today. My name is Jo Draper. I lead up the land development team here at Abley. And I wanted to just give you a brief rundown on why district plan reviews are important and how we can evolve those to meet today's context. So to start us off, I just wanted to ask a question of everyone to have a think about while I'm talking, which is it okay for an apartment building to have no parking? And we'll come back to that question at the end. So I'm sure many of you are very, very familiar with the district plan review process. District plans obviously provide objectives, policies and rules about sustainably managing land use and development. And there's a requirement under the Resource Management Act to review them every 10 years. And there's also provision to review your district plan at any other time during, not just on that 10-year timeframe. There are also national planning standards which have come in, which provide some guidance on the structure and writing of your district plans when you come to review them. But why would we review a district plan? There's essentially three reasons you might do that. So the first would be changing environment or trends. So some examples, for example, you might have some new subdivisions that you want to put into your area, but the zoning of your plan might not allow for that. So that might be the first thing you do. Another example, perhaps a marina's been built in your area And that marina might lead to more demand for car and boat spaces to be provided, and perhaps your district plan doesn't allow for spaces of those dimensions. The second reason you might review your district plan is to accommodate evolving best practice. So, for example, you might have a growing desire to accommodate pedestrian movements and competing use of footpaths. That might translate into a rule or some guidance on intersection spacing or access spacing or the width of accesses. So you might try to adapt your plan to accommodate that. Another example, you might want to, for example, accommodate cycling better. Do you require cycle parking in your district plan? Or do you rely on developers to provide that cycle parking? That's one approach. But if you don't have any minimum standards for cycle parking, then the developer is free to do what they like. You need your district plan rules to give you that impetus to help guide that development towards cycle parking. And the third reason you might review a plan is to correct some inconsistencies in the plan. So, for example, you might have a design document that sits alongside your district plan, and perhaps you've just recently reviewed your design document, but has the district plan also been reviewed to correctly refer to it? There may be inconsistencies between the two, which you need to correct. Examples, you might have, for example, some inconsistencies in parking space dimensions between your district plan and the design document. There are some other examples of inconsistencies. And here's a good example of an inconsistency between the district plan and the building code. On the left there, you have a layout that shows an accessible parking space, which would be compliant with most district plans. District plans typically say you must provide accessible parking in accordance with the standards. But you can see that to access that accessible parking space, you would have to cross the interior vehicular circulating carriageway to get to that building. Whereas a building code requirement would say that car parks have to be located to avoid conflict between vehicles and people using those accessible spaces. So if you can adjust your district plan to accommodate the building code, you would end up with a better outcome. And there's a similar conflict with, for example, use of fire appliances, which may not have the correct or the most appropriate guidance about where fire appliance access should be located next to a building. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this MFE diagram, which shows you the process for a plan change, similar to a plan review. I just wanted to emphasise that as you go through this long process, there are points when specialist input could be helpful. And the most important point is towards the beginning, when you have most area of influence. Transport in particular cuts across many, many different areas of the district plan. So it's really important to have your transport professionals talking to the other areas. So, for example, housing, infrastructure, subdivisions, there's all transport elements in all of those elements. So you want to get them involved early on in the plan process. And it's harder to get involved later if you haven't been involved earlier on in, for example, doing summaries of submissions or hearings. So coming back to my original question, is it okay to build apartments without parking? This is an example of an apartment building in Auckland. It's in Mount Roskill and it's under construction, and it has no allocated parking for residents whatsoever, just a couple of visitor spaces. It is, however, very close to a railway station, and you can see there's some cycling facilities nearby as well. And in this case, the district plan is quite clear. There is no minimum requirement for parking, so absolutely fine. In your district, you might think that putting in an apartment building without any parking would be a dangerous thing to do. You might end up with a lot of parking on streets, which could cause safety hazards. But if you think that perhaps this is the direction you want to go in, apartments without parking might be something, then perhaps your district plan doesn't currently allow it. So it might be something to think about if you're doing a district plan review. And that is all I had to say. There is a very interesting paper written by a colleague of mine, which is on that link there. So I think the slide set will be shared if anyone wants to follow that. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Jo. We haven't had any questions come through yet on that. It might be a good idea to share that link in the Q&A as well, so that people can directly access it now if they want to. Sure. Okay, Harris, we will hand over to you now if you want to start sharing your presentation.
Yes, thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Courtney. Just get you to confirm you can see my screen. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I understand we have more than 50 attendees now, so that's great to see. Today, I will discuss a very important development in the speed management space, which is the Tackling Unsafe Speeds program. So this is a collection of agreed government policies which form a key action in the recently released Road to Zero strategy. Cabinet agreed to these policies in November last year, but a rule change is required to give effect to them, which I understand will be consulted on later this year. I'll also touch briefly on the process of developing a speed management plan as well. So Tackling Unsafe Speeds program has 3 different components. The first component is establishing a new regulatory framework for speed management. This framework will define the responsibilities for local authorities, which I'll talk more about. But the real key change here is the removal of the current bylaw requirements, which I'm sure will be welcomed by a lot of you. The second component is transitioning to lower speed limits around schools, both urban and rural schools. And with this transition, the expectation is that 40% of schools will have lower speed limits in the first 3 years. The program also includes a wider rollout of visible safety cameras to support our safety initiatives around the country. So with the proposed framework, Waka Kotahi is responsible for developing a state highway speed management plan. They will also establish a national register of speed limits, which will replace the current bylaw requirements. Local authorities will still be responsible for making speed management decisions on their road network. These proposals will be collated by the regional transport committees, and then that will feed into a regional speed management plan. So the intent here is to have a more collaborative approach between local authorities within a region, so we achieve a more consistent outcome across a region and then nationally as well. So speed management plans, these plans will outline speed management proposals on all local roads within a region over a 10-year period. And they'll be aligned with regional land transport plans. So that will really streamline the funding process as well. Local authorities will be expected to take a whole of network approach to considering any speed limit changes. This includes consideration for not just speeds, but also any infrastructure investment and safety camera proposals as well. These plans will outline how and when speed limit changes will be implemented. And the expectation is that first 3 years of the plan, the proposal will be outlined in detail. And then for years after that, a high-level proposal for a speed management review is fine. So the real change with in terms of consultation is that the entire plan will be consulted on with community and stakeholders, rather than what happens currently, which is on a road-by-road basis or on an area-wide basis. So the community and the stakeholders will see what the plan is for the whole region and get a real clear picture of what's in the works. So this slide just summarizes the process of developing a speed management plan, and I've just taken this from the speed management guide, and this process is largely unchanged. So the starting point is mega maps, which prioritizes high benefit parts of the network for speed management at a regional level. These outputs from mega maps then need to be sense tested by local authorities to firstly check the assumptions in mega maps, but also to ensure alignment with local transport strategies and local knowledge, and that's really important. So more often than not, when we have our list of high benefit opportunities at a network level, then we'll need to do a site visit to really understand what is the appropriate intervention, whether that's a speed limit reduction or if that needs to be also complemented by engineering works or other interventions like enforcement, for example. I'll just finish up with an example of a speed management plan that Abley developed for the Christchurch City Council. We started with the MegaMaps data and did site visits on the prioritized roads to understand the type of interventions required. And these plans, they highlight which roads may require physical works and which roads where we can just change the speed limit without doing any extensive engineering works, because the current operating speeds allow us to do that. So it's really important to go on the site and understand what are the interventions that are needed. So the plan that we did for the City Council in Christchurch focused on roads that are 60 kilometres and above, as per the Council's target to reduce death and serious injuries on these parts of the network. So with the Tackling Unsafe Speeds program that's in the works and hopefully comes into effect later this year or start of next year, the intent is for Christchurch City Council to collaborate with its neighbours, Selwyn District Council and Waimak District Council, and perhaps extend some of the treatments on the district boundary roads to achieve a more consistent outcome for road users. So that's a very brief overview of Tackling Unsafe Speeds program and speed management plans. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or get in touch with me later on.
Thanks, Harris. We have got a bit of a lag just between the presentation and questions coming through, so we haven't got anything just yet. So we'll move on and circle back at the end if there is anything. I know some have come through from Joe's presentation now too. So do get those questions in as quick as you can to get them answered. Okay, we will hand over to you, Matthew, if you want to start sharing your presentation.
Thanks for that, Courtney. As I begin, I just want to note that having spent a number of years in transport planning, one of the most common challenges I've come across is people trying to understand what we're trying to achieve. And while site visits can help people understand these issues, this can be difficult and it doesn't help demonstrate what improvements will look like. This is where we've found 3D models and visualizations have opened up a whole new way for us to communicate issues, test alternatives, and demonstrate changes that were unavailable to us even just a few years ago. Firstly, I just want to state that we're not just talking about traffic models, static images, or one-off renderings such as artist impressions. We're talking about spatially referenced, accurate, adaptable, and modifiable models. Here you can see a simple illustration of Lyttelton Harbour, which shows a cruise ship to scale against the built and natural environment. But also, because of the nature of the model, it's also got the time of day showing the sun where would it be at 12 o'clock at the daytime. You can change the time of day, cloud cover, sight lines, those types of things. While there are a range of uses as to how this could be used, as an example, how would this help if you were to consider the impacts of shading and ice in winter if you were developing new cycle routes in the town? The other thing I wanted to be clear on is quite often there is concerns about the data availability, but actually most of it already exists. LINZ particularly has a considerable range of data sets that are free for use, which can also be supplemented by your own local or regional council data, in addition to private sector data that is around. For instance, LINZ is very good for digital surface models and digital elevation models. These can capture the natural and built features of the environment, particularly helpful if you're looking for sight lines on curved roads, for instance, for viewing obstructions, or bare earth for topography and gradients. But you can also include subsurface utilities such as power, gas, communications, and then combine it all into one rich picture. And as far as accuracy goes, depending on the data set, of course, you can get down to within 50 millimeters, which I think most people would agree is probably more than sufficient for how we're using the models. In terms of applications, we are fundamentally only limited by our imagination. From a base model, you can then use it for a whole range of different elements. On the screen here, you can see different images for transport planning and traffic engineering, whether it's optioneering and design testing, through to hazard assessment for sea level rise on particular areas, through to construction detailing, and where I think there's great potential, stakeholder engagement. I'll now just run through a couple of examples where we've added where the added context to the visualization has been particularly helpful. Here we have reported safety incidents plotted on a map. While it can tell us the distribution, it doesn't tell us much more. If we overlay that with the aerial, you can see it's a rural road. And while we can zoom in on a particular stretch, it's still relatively challenging. However, if we take it to the next level and do a drive through, this is a simple point cloud and surface model. How does that understand? Where these flags are also where there are safety issues, passing and overtaking. So when you see blind bends, lack of sight distance, etc., it tells you there's probably an issue there that wouldn't have been just easily understandable from the aerial. And similarly, please note that this was produced as a rough and ready example to illustrate how different levels of detail may or may not be required. This was just some digital service models with a LiDAR data set. Similarly, we took an approach in Wellington where we've done something similar. Note how elevation and additional terrain detail provides even greater context. In this example, the different coloured flags represent different issues: cyclists, speeding, red light running. You may also notice that there's a flag in the middle of the Basin Reserve. This was actually someone protesting about the bouncer last time the Aussies played. And I should also say, for this one, there's a high level of image quality as well. But again, it's about the detail that can be provided. Similarly, we've taken this to one further stretch, and this has got a school highlighted in the middle with, again, flags of issues. And around here, we could try new surface treatments, but it can change the context so people can see how we could use it for road safety, cycle training, engineering interventions, enforcement campaigns, and it bringing all that together in one image. I'm also sure you're all familiar with standard drawing designs and cross sections, and while we as industry professionals can understand what this means, it is still limited. When you put it into a 3D context, however, you can get a much better appreciation of gradients, dimensions, size and locations in a completely different way. So this was taking that DWG and transferring it across into this 3D environment. And while this was relatively fast in terms of the fly through, you can spin around, drop down to eye level, go up to bird's eye. It's completely versatile depending on what you need. And lastly, the good old traffic model output. I'm sure we've all seen more than enough of little green, red and blue dots moving across the screen, although I should apologise if there are any modelers listening in, to show how a network may function. What you may not be aware of is that Paramix, for instance, has also done their own version of 3D visualizations. To my mind, it looks quite basic. So what we did is actually took it through to the next level and dropped the model into the actual urban rural environment. So the cars you'll see on the map here, for bandwidth limitations, I can't play it at the moment, but you could actually see this model movement of all vehicles through the network as per the model outputs. So you can see there's a much greater functionality to enable 3D traffic modeling in a context-rich environment. This was just a brief taster of how 3D modeling and visualizations can provide significant value and benefit for a wide range of transport planning and engineering applications. While my time is now up, I would be very interested in hearing about how you could see this providing opportunities for your projects and stakeholders. My contact details are on the screen, and I look forward to hearing from you. Back to you, Courtney.
Wonderful. Thanks, Matthew. We've got one question that's come through on that so far. That all sounds great, Matthew, but that looks pricey. How much would a typical project cost, and would we be able to get funding from Waka Kotahi for this?
Depending on the size and depth of the model, obviously there is some limitations there, but fundamentally most of these visualizations are somewhere in the $5,000 to $15,000 range. So overall not much, plus the fact as a model build, once the base model is built, you can use it for a variety of purposes. So you can keep coming back to it, you can change other things, and it's got a lot of longevity. As far as the agencies approach to models, we have secured commissions from them, and they've been more than appreciative in terms of how it's enabled the proposals, optioneering and other elements to come through and change the messaging in terms of improving the clarity and understanding for the community, for decision makers and for general design and development.
You're muted, Courtney.
Sorry. One last question for you, Matthew, from Kushla at Huranui. I'd love to have a simple way for people average residents to be able to report near misses or crashes that are not attended by the police. We have an interactive map that allows people to drop a pin on our network that gives us some information. This would be great input for CAS crash modelling, particularly important for low volume networks, predominantly rural, such as Huranui.
Yes, that's something we have been working with. In the flags that were shown on some of these images, we've actually been working with New Zealand Police, grabbing their incident records. So this is where people have called star 555, 111, reported online. So there's a whole range of data out there, and we'd be more than happy to discuss and see how else we could make that easier for you.
Wonderful. All right, we will hand back to Paul now.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. And look, thanks everyone for sending through your questions today. We hope that you found that a really useful webinar that covered off a range of topics that I'm sure were interesting to you. If we didn't get a chance to respond to a question, then like I mentioned earlier, we'll respond to those in writing and we'll send out all of that information to our webinar attendees along with the recording of the webinar and the presentation pack. Look, can I thank our 5 presenters today, Dave, Jeanette, Joe, Harris and Matthew, and also our facilitator, Courtney. You did a great job passing on those questions, Courtney. If any of you have any questions about any topic covered in the webinar today, then please reach out to one of our subject matter experts to ask that question. Equally, if you're interested in finding out more about how you can access some of the central government funding that is being talked about and made available for a local project, then please do the same and we'll provide you with some advice on that as well. So look, thank you very much for attending. We hope that was useful and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I think just before everyone goes, we have run out of time, so please do run away if you need to, but we will just answer a couple more questions from the panel, from attendees before we do, where they didn't come in time. So Joe, we'll go to you initially, just on what do you think about relaxed resource consent requirements to support the economy in response to COVID? That's been quite a popular question.
Yeah, it is a relevant question, isn't it? It's difficult for us to say. It's probably not a question that we can answer, but I do see that Kushla has given us quite a helpful response lower down here, which I'll read out. Regarding the resource consent condition changes to support boosting infrastructure post-COVID-19 pandemic, NZTA are working to support consenting authorities to get around some rules and waive some, possibly a long-term change to the RMA to support a boost in the economy, starting with the list of projects over 10 million value. So it sounds like there are avenues to assist with consenting at this time, and it's obviously a time when we would want to see consenting being pushed forward to support the economy.
Great, thank you, Joe. And we've got one here for you, Harris. Hi Harris, the issue I have with the Unsafe Speed program for reducing speeds is that we focus on our busiest roads with the mega maps info, which tend to be the safest too. So then we propose a speed reduction on our safest roads while leaving high speeds on the lower volume yet less safe roads. What would you say to that, Harris?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kushla. So Mega Maps does provide us two sort of different types of high benefit opportunities, and one of them focuses on achieving the greatest death and serious injury reduction benefit, and that will naturally be on our busiest roads. But we also have to focus on roads that are called self-explaining in Mega Maps, and they tend to be lower volume roads where the speed is not in alignment with the current operating speeds. Generally, operating speeds are lower. So we do have the opportunity to lower the speed limit on those roads where we don't need to do a lot of engineering work to support that, and generally we achieve good compliance as well. So there is the opportunity to focus on a program in your district which is looking at those lower volume roads, and Mega Maps provides a good starting point for that. but you can do that across a district. For example, you can look at your unsealed network and do a blanket change on that to a lower than 100-kilometer speed limit. So mega maps is really a starting point for that, but it does provide a indication of where to focus for those self-expanding roads as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Harris. I think we will leave it there and we will respond in writing to any additional questions where we haven't quite managed to fit in answering them. But thank you to reflect Paul's comments. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will be sending the link out to the webinar shortly. Thank you.